Welcome to the Haunted Half Moon Inn. Tales from the Half Moon Inn presents The Werewolf of the Hudson Valley. Written and narrated by Tony Capobianco. The fire in the fireplace crackled as I leaned forward in my chair and shined my flashlight in my face and asked, "Have you ever gone outside at night and felt like you weren't alone? Have you ever thought that someone or something was watching you?" "Oh my gosh, Dan. Yes, there have been times at night when I couldn't shake the fear that something was watching me while I walked Pennyfluff, the dancing labradoodle," Christina replied as her eyes grew wide. "Yeah, you're not alone. I too have heard noises in the woods when I walk Jupiter, my German shepherd, at night. Who knows what's scurrying around in the darkness? Luckily, I don't think that any animals would want to mess with my furry best friend," Enoch added as he looked towards the window. "All right, Dan. It's your turn to tell us a scary tale," said Felicity with a mischievous smile. "The next story might make you think twice about the sounds that you hear when you venture into the darkness of the night," I said as I began to tell the next creepy story to the spooky squad. Once upon a Hudson Valley full moonlit night, a teenager walked his dog in the ghostly light. The tall trees cast a shadow as if the Roman gods of old had tossed a blanket over the moon. The silent dark of night contributed to the escalating fever of fright. Greatly diminished sight made the ominous sense of dread more difficult to fight. On most nights, such feelings of fear are nothing but a primordial instinct, but this wasn't most nights. Rob walked Scooter, his mutt, fairly close to his house, just as he had done every night over the 8 years that he had had his furry friend. Side by side they'd walk through the backyard and enter the woods. Having Scooter do his business in the forest meant that Rob wouldn't have to mess around with a pooper scooper. Each step that they took into the woods broke the eerie silence. As Scooter sniffed and circled around a small patch of forest floor for about 5 minutes in search for the perfect spot to fertilize, Rob began to think that they weren't alone. "Come on, Scooter, make potty. Go make potty, boy. Let's go," Rob said, hoping to speed up the process so that they could get back inside. Scooter had other plans as he continued to sniff around as if he was an inspector looking for a clue to solve a crime. Standing in place with a flashlight in his left hand and Scooter's leash in his right, he saw it. 2 large yellow eyes staring at him. It was about 50 yards away from them. From that distance, it was hard to judge how high off of the ground the eyes were. Rob didn't know what kind of animal those eyes belonged to, but the eyes were definitely too big to belong to a cat or a possum. He shined his light towards the direction of the eyes to get a better look. There were bears and coyotes that lived in the area. As he searched the area with his flashlight, he couldn't find the owner of the yellow eyes. The silence was broken by the distinctive sound of footsteps walking over the leaf-covered floor. Scooter suddenly stopped circling and snapped his head towards the footsteps. His canine senses searched for the cause of the noise as his hair rose between his shoulder blades. Scooter picked up on the presence of something that intruded upon his territory. He barked loudly. It was a deep bark that was fitting for a large dog of his size. Weighing 65 pounds, he was no lapdog. Scooter stopped barking and looked at his master. The short silence was shattered by a loud, haunting howl. Rob's blood ran cold. Goosebumps arose. His heart pounded in his chest, and it felt like a bolt of electricity had traveled up his spine. He had never heard anything like that before. He was familiar with the barking and howling of dogs and coyotes. The sound of howling wolves in nature documentaries didn't match what he had just heard. The deeply unsettling and beastly call continued. It sounded like it belonged to a very large beast. The terrible sound seemed to be a hybrid of a wolf's howl and a lion's roar. The howling rang through the woods. Even the trees seemed to tremble at the horror. The pale light from the full moon trickled through the canopy of trees, and this too added to the frightful scene. Scooter jumped back about 4 feet at the sound of this unknown creature. Rob shouted, "Let's go home, boy," as he ran out of the woods and towards his lawn. Scooter dutifully obeyed his master and ran ahead as far as the length of the leash allowed. The howling ceased and gave way to the sound of Rob's heavy breathing and the pounding of his feet against the ground. The dark shroud of the woods unraveled as Rob and Scooter reached the open sky of his backyard. The pale bluish light of the full moon returned Rob's sense of sight. This was both a blessing and a curse. Being able to see without a flashlight was a blessing which brought relief in being able to see what was out there. It was also a curse, because seeing an enormous beast would only raise the level of fear to an even higher level. The house was getting closer as Rob and Scooter sprinted to reach it. The problem was that the creature was getting closer, much closer. The beast growled as it ran its intended prey down. Dan heard the large footsteps running upon the leaves that littered the forest floor. The noise of the rustling branches made by the beast as it moved through the woods gave Rob a blending of reassurance and fear. He was reassured because as long as he could hear the sounds in the woods, it meant that the animal hadn't yet reached his lawn. That reassurance died swiftly as the sound of an animal crashing through tree limbs and the forest brush stopped. The growling continued and in fact had grown closer. Rob turned his head as he continued to run in order to take a glance and see if they were still being chased, and if so, by what. He saw an enormous creature. It was taller than him, and he was 5'10". It was also much bigger than him, and must have weighed over 300 pounds. Only a bear could be that size, but bears don't howl. The house was now approximately 15 yards away. There's no way of knowing what raced faster, Rob's heart, legs, or his mind. This wasn't just the race of his life, but a race for his life. "Daddy, help! Help me!" screamed Rob as he sprinted as fast as his legs could possibly carry him. As in a nightmare, it felt as though the ground was swallowing his feet in quicksand, no matter how fast and hard he ran. A sharp, piercing pain tore down his back as an immensely powerful blow blasted him 10 feet into the air and crashing onto the ground. As Rob had been launched into the air, the force of the assault flung his flashlight from his left hand, and it flew a number of yards until it crashed through the kitchen window. Dazed and confused, Rob was like a slaughtered hunk of meat laid out on the ground with his eyes shut. The wind had been knocked out of him. Although time seemed to feel like an eternal now, only several moments had passed since he had been sliced and thrashed into the moonlit sky. Rob opened his eyes. The haunting, pale glow of the full moon revealed to him what the dark forest had previously concealed. What he saw shouldn't have been possible, but the ethereal light of the moon divulged the unmistakable presence of a monster. Yes, that creature was a monster. Of that fact, there was no doubt. That thing was not a coyote. It wasn't a dog. It wasn't a wolf. It certainly wasn't a bear. A furry beast that stood at least 6 feet tall and weighed no less than 300 pounds stood on the lawn of a house in the Hudson Valley. It had the head of a wolf, but the head was far too big to belong to any ordinary wolf or dog. The teeth appeared as though they would be interchangeable with the big, serrated teeth in the jaws of a great white shark. Its muscular body was a horrendous combination of man and wolf. It stood upright on its back legs. It was capable of being bipedal or walking on all fours. Its arms resembled the arms of a gorilla. Its razor-sharp claws resembled that of a tiger or a Deinonychus. The latter was a frightful dinosaur that you probably know better as the velociraptors of the Jurassic Park and Jurassic World movies. The piercing yellow eyes of this monster completed its hauntingly otherworldly appearance. The creature that stood in Rob's backyard seemed to be a mythical monster, but this was not a myth. The beast appeared to belong in a nightmare, but apparently it had escaped into the real world. This hulking horror was a werewolf. The werewolf momentarily paused because it had become distracted by the loud noise made when the flashlight broke through the glass window. That momentary distraction gave Rob just enough time to see the monster that had attacked him and to pick up a piece of broken glass to use as a weapon. The werewolf had walked a few steps towards the window, in the manner that a man walks. Then, once it returned its focus towards its prey, it lunged towards Rob as a beast on all fours. As the werewolf pounced on top of Rob repeatedly stabbed it in its chest and neck with the sharp shard of glass. At the same time, Scooter recklessly threw himself on the back of the werewolf. The large jaws of Scooter bit into the monster again and again. The werewolf and Scooter continuously growled at each other. The long arm of the werewolf was finally able to reach towards its back and swipe Scooter off as if he was a pesky fly. Blood sprayed all over the green grass. The razor-sharp claws of the werewolf had torn into Scooter's flesh and deeply wounded him. "Son, get away from that thing. Quick! Get in the house, now!" yelled Rob's dad. Rob's dad had heard the kitchen window break, and when he saw a large animal attacking his son, he grabbed his Glock. As soon as Rob got away from the beast, his dad began to unload his clip into it. Boom, boom, boom! Boom, boom! Having suffered injuries from being bit, stabbed, and shot, the werewolf fled into the woods. Rob's mom took him to the emergency room to get rabies shots and to get stitches. His dad took Scooter to a 24-hour animal hospital because he was in dire shape. After surgery, Scooter pulled through. If it wasn't for Scooter's loyalty, a flashlight breaking a window, and his dad's quick response, Rob would have been mauled to death by the vicious werewolf. The traumatic events of that evening deeply scarred Rob, emotionally, physically, and psychologically. The wound on his back caused by the razor-sharp claws of the monster left him a sinister reminder that nightmares aren't always the stuff of dreamland. Sometimes nightmares are real. The attack led Rob to use his internet browser to research werewolf lore and to investigate whether other animal attacks had been reported. The search results for the keywords animal attack and Hudson Valley produced an astounding wealth of reports. Many of the reports included ordinary dog and coyote attacks. Fewer reports detailed the rare black bear attacks which resulted in the death of a person or child. The finding that stood out the most was the number of articles which reported that the number of animal attacks in the Hudson Valley had soared in recent years. The local news reported that animal attacks and deaths caused by animal attacks had quadrupled in the past 5 years. Were werewolves responsible for the recent surge in violent animal attacks? Or is it just one werewolf? More research would need to be done in order to discover the answers. What seemed certain was that the werewolf of the Hudson Valley lived on after the night of the attack. Rob's father had searched the woods the next morning along with people from animal control, and they didn't find its body. Although Rob's father believed that it was some kind of bear that assaulted and injured his son, Rob knew better. Rob knew that it was a werewolf that nearly murdered him and Scooter on that horrific night. Next time you walk your dog or hear a noise outside at night, remember that you might not be alone. The rustling that you hear, the fear and the feeling that you are being watched might not be caused by your imagination. There are times when, in an instant, the ordinary changes into the extraordinary. The natural can transform into the supernatural. Sometimes the monsters of our nightmares enter our lives. When nightmares become reality, run! I hope you enjoyed your stay at the Half Moon Inn. Do come and visit us again. Until next time, always remember that just because you don't see them doesn't mean that they aren't there.
Thank you.